Hi, so today we are going to be talking about Chapter 8 of the text. This chapter talks about the social learning theory. So, this theory was actually developed by Albert Bandura, as page 256 states. And basically, what this theory says, as the name implies, is that we learn from each other. We learn from a social context, from interacting with one another. So, another way that we actually learn is through vicarious experience. So, we learn through what other people have gone through. So, for instance, if I see a friend who showed up to a bowling alley to go bowling and they forgot their money, I would then learn that I need to remember to bring my money with me when I go bowling. So, I would be learning vicariously through somebody else's experience. I mean, um, through their experience. So not only do we learn through vicarious experience, but also through vicarious reinforcement. So by the experience that we see other people having, but how others are reacting to those experiences. So the example that page 257 states is that if a child is misbehaving and a teacher smiles at that child, the other children in the classroom will actually learn to misbehave because that behavior is being reinforced. Um, One last way to learn is through vicarious punishment. So when a teacher takes away free time for a student who misbehaves, the other students recognize this and they see that they would also get the same punishment if they misbehave, so they would be less likely to misbehave. So there's a piece to social learning called modeling, and there are actually three different types of modeling. There is observational learning, inhibitory and disinhibitory effects, and response facilitation. So we're going to go through those piece by piece to just talk about them a little bit. Observational learning is learning by observing other individuals. So this kind of is very related to the social learning theory, and just learning from others. And there are actually a few conditions needed for observational learning, as page 259 mentions. So observational learning requires attention, which is just focus, retention, which is being able to keep the information being learned, production, which is being able to imitate the behavior, and lastly, motivation. So the child has to actually want to do something. Those are the four conditions needed to facilitate observational learning. Then there is inhibitory and disinhibitory effects. So that is actually when a teacher either follows through with the reprimandation or not, thus making other children's behavior either disinhibited or inhibited. For example, if a teacher says, oh, if you get out of your seat again, you're going to have two more worksheets of homework. But then when the child stands up and when the student stands up and the teacher doesn't give those two extra sheets of homework, their other students learn through that saying, oh, well, if they can do this and they don't get in trouble, then I can do this and won't get in trouble. So the last part of this is response facilitation, and that is when a student notices someone doing a behavior that they already know, and the student may do the same. So they already have the skills to partake in this behavior. It's just in a different scenario, and they see one of their peers acting in this scenario, so they choose to enact in that too. Next, the chapter talks about complex cognition. So, page 262 states that metacognition is thinking about one's own thinking. This is important for actually quite a few different reasons. There's self-explanation, so a student can show what they know, being able to explain what they're thinking and being able to think critically about what their reasoning is, which leads into the next part, reasoning and argumentation. So being able to understand one's own thoughts in order to explain, to reason, and even to argue their points. They need to be able to recognize what they're thinking and why they're thinking it in order to express that to others, to either add to a point or to talk about a point in a different way, or arguing. Thinking about one's own thinking or metacognition is also important in problem solving. So being able to think critically about a given situation and the different solutions to that problem. But there are a few obstacles when it comes to problem solving. That is functional fixedness and response set. So functional fixedness is being able to consider only the typical function of an object, as page 266 states. So in other words, it's not being able to think outside the box. It's seeing this particular item as only being able to do one thing and only having one function. So again, it's functional fixedness. And then the other obstacle that I mentioned was response set. So that is responding to different scenarios or different problems in the same way every time. So learning one solution to a problem and thinking that that can be the same solution across the board. So this comes to the point of how can educators promote problem solving in the classroom? Page 267 states that the teacher must help students develop strategies and create a supportive environment so students can take risks. So being able to let these students take risks in their problem solving and be able to think outside the box, saying something that maybe isn't typical, it actually helps them and promotes their problem solving skills. So this chapter also focuses on complex cognition and social constructivism. And these theories say that learners construct knowledge in a social context, as page 268 points out. So they go on to talk about dialectical relationships, or basically relationships where both parties have equal influence on one another, and that occurs in a social context. So as I was sitting next to one of my peers, I would be having just as much influence on them as they would be having on me. So a major part of these theories actually depend on experience. So children's experiences help them to develop their understandings of the world and their academics. So what they have already experienced or what they already know influences how they are able to learn. So the book states on page 271 that learning is most effective when educators draw on the experiences of their students. So being able to take those experiences and know that's their background knowledge and where they're coming from and being able to actually put that to use and help their students learn is very beneficial. So chapter 8 also goes on to talk a bit about how the social constructivist and socioculture theory influence instruction. So some examples of strategies that influence learning are cognitive apprenticeships, reciprocal teaching, and problem-based learning. So the first one, cognitive apprenticeships, are when the learner models the activities of the teacher and is coached by the teacher. That's how they learn, as page 280 depicts. So being able to watch the teacher do something and to accomplish a task and then being able to, in fact, do that task again as the teacher coaches them, that would be cognitive apprenticeship. The second one I mentioned was reciprocal teaching, and that is having a joint dialogue between teachers and students regarding a text. So being able to ask specific questions about a text and both being focused on the same part, that would be reciprocal teaching. Lastly, the third part that I mentioned was problem-based learning, and that is when students work in groups to solve a problem that does not have a single specific answer. So one of those could be something that we actually did earlier in the year. We worked together to create a seating chart. Now, there's no one specific seating chart that is used across the board in all classrooms. So that is why it was very important for us to work together and come up with different solutions to this problem when there isn't a clear-cut answer that it absolutely has to be right. So a great way to facilitate learning is through classroom communities. And this includes giving the students some sort of choice in their learning environment. The book mentions about maybe trying to choose some of their curriculum, so giving them some freedom. And okay, well, maybe we're going to be talking about rocks this semester. What kind of rocks do you want to talk about? Giving them that choice and that basically just that choice actually helps with the classroom community and facilitates learning. So these are the ways that Chapter 8 discusses the importance of social learning. Thank you for listening.